Seeing clearly. It is important in our daily life. We get eye exams, glasses, or maybe contacts, all to be certain that we're perceiving what is around us correctly. How are your spiritual eyes? Are you able to see and perceive what is going on around you? Do you recognize when God shows his love and provision for you? We're going to actually look at 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 1 through 23 today. I'm not going to read the whole entirety of that text, but I will read. I'll probably read it entirely throughout the course of the next 30 minutes, but not at one time. Does that make sense? So there are two stories we're going to look at. The first one, and both of them regarding the prophet Elisha. And so the first one talks about the floating axe head. Now, how many of you have read the story of the floating axe head? How many of you have ever heard somebody explain to you why the story is in the Bible? How many of you have ever heard someone explain what it means? I mean, I've heard sermons on it, but they generally have been kind of in context and just saying, "Hey, here's a miracle." That's pretty much how it's been. And I'm not going to go into a great deep dive on this story, but I am going to maybe share it with you a little bit differently. And if you were to go look at all the types and shadows that are involved in this story, there's a lot of them. You can kind of extend those out pretty far if you want to. But the answer to why it's in the Bible, that was pretty funny because I was asking God. I like to ask God questions. Why is this here? What does it mean? That kind of stuff. I was asking God why it was in the Bible. And I was meditating on the Sunday school lesson. And I thought, I'm going to call a pastor and see why he thinks it was in the Bible. And his response was exactly what God had been saying to me. It just made me kind of chuckle. He said, because it happened. Thank you. That makes perfect sense. It happened. One day, the group of prophets came to Elisha and told him, as you can see, this place where we meet with you is too small. Let's go down to the Jordan River where there are plenty of logs. There we can build a new place for us to meet. All right, he told them, go ahead. Well, please come with us, someone suggested. I will, he said, so he went with them. I'm going to stop right there for just a second. This was a minister's outing, okay? They had been meeting. God had been growing them, and so they had outgrown the space that they were in. And they were not, by any account, wealthy. Like, they had tons of money, so it's like, they didn't say, well, let's get a hold of a contractor and see if we can do a building project, and, maybe we could ask for some extra giving, and, we could put one of those thermometer things on the wall to show how we're doing, and, they didn't do that. They just said, hey, if we kind of roll up our sleeves, we can go take and use the logs and stuff down there, and we can build a bigger spot to meet. Okay? So it says, when they arrived at the Jordan, they began cutting down trees. Probably wouldn't be popular today. But they began cutting down trees, and as one of them was cutting a tree, his axe head fell into the river. Oh, he cried, it was a borrowed axe. It's just a minister's outing, but the axe head became a big deal. Why? Because he had borrowed it. What's the issue with that? He wanted to do what was right. And yet, he probably didn't have the funds to do that. I mean, think about it. To begin with, if you had the means to get an axe, would you have bought and brought your own, or borrowed one? Well, you'd probably bought and brought your own. So he's wanting to do what's right here, but he doesn't have the means to do so. And Elijah says, where did it fall? And the man of God asked, so Elijah asked, and when he showed him the place, Elijah cut a stick and threw it into the water at that spot. And again, you could look at types and shadows. We're not going to do that today. But it says that he threw the stick into the river there. And it says, then the axe head floated to the surface. Grab it, Elisha said, and the man reached out and grabbed it. Now, I do like the King James, in that it says that the axe head swam to the surface. I just like that. Means the same thing, but it just sounds so cool. The axe head swam to the surface. Elisha helped out here. There's a lot of pieces and parts to this. There's the man's genuine desire to do what's right. He's there trying to help out and build a better place for them to meet. He's giving of his time, trying to do all these things, and then he's borrowed this axe and it breaks, and he's distraught, wants to do what's right, really doesn't have the means, comes to the man of God and says, help me out. And Elisha has the faith to believe that God can raise an axe head to the surface of the river. Right? So the question is, what am I seeing here? I'm seeing God do a miracle. I'm seeing God defy the very laws of nature. Iron doesn't float really, unless you make a really big ship and put a whole lot of, But an axe head isn't hollow and filled with air. They don't float. I mean, I've lost little fishing lures about this big. They don't float either. I had a fishing lure one time. I finally did lose it. I had a fishing lure. I found it on a fishing trip when I was 12. And it was called Lucky 13. And I found it stuck in a tree. And I always thought, how ironic, it wasn't very lucky for that guy. It wasn't very lucky for me either some years later when I lost it in similar fashion. So, but if you've lost an axe head into the river, it's gone, except God. God can restore. Elisha knew God could restore. I don't know that Elisha stood there and said, God, make that axe head swim. We would consider that stupid, right? But he said, God, do a miracle. And he did. And so he saw with his eyes the physical miracle that was done. Saw with his eyes what was physically happening, even though his mind might say, you know what, that can't be right. He couldn't deny what his eyes were seeing. His eyes were seeing a miracle of God. How many of you have seen a miracle of God? How many of you look for a miracle from God? Where's your hope? I have hope in a God who can do miracles. I've referenced it several times, and I apologize, but it's always stuck in my head about the guy who was on the airplane and the landing gear wouldn't come down, and he prayed, and God showed him a schematic. Now, he was an engineer, but he was not an aeronautical engineer, and he was not an engineer dealing with hydraulics, but God showed him a schematic of the hydraulics for the landing gear of the airplane that he was on. And he was able to tell that to the stewardess, who went and got the co-pilot, and the co-pilot came back and talked to him, and he explained to him what God was showing him, and the co-pilot said, I know exactly where to go to fix that, and was able to open a hatch and go in and fix it, and the plane landed safely. I would call that a miracle, right? You can say, well, man did it. I mean, he fixed it. Yeah, it was plain to see. Now, did he see that with his eyes? No, he saw it in his mind's eye, right? He received the email before there was such a thing, right? Yeah, like Pastor Chris with the fan last week. Or Pastor Steve with the card last week or so, whatever, what it was. It was a while back. Okay. I don't know how far back, but anyway. But that's seeing something with your physical eyes. Okay? Now, it says right after this, when the king of Aram was at war with Israel, he would confer with his officers and say, "We will mobilize our forces at such and such a place." But immediately Elisha, the man of God, would warn the king of Israel, "Do not go near that place, for the Arameans are planning to mobilize their troops there." So the king of Israel would send word to the place indicated by the man of God. Time and time again, Elisha warned the king so that he would be on the alert there. And the king of Aram became very upset over this. He called his officers together and demanded, "Which of you is the traitor?" Right? Who has been informing the king of Israel of my plans? "It's not us, my lord the king," one of the officers replied. "Elisha, the prophet in Israel, tells the king of Israel even the words you speak in the privacy of your bedroom." "Go and find out where he is," the king commanded, "so I can send troops to seize him." And the report came back, "Elisha is at Dothan." So one night the king of Aram sent a great army with the many chariots and horses to surround the city. And when the servant of God, or the servant of the man of God, got up early the next morning and went outside, there were troops, horses, and chariots everywhere. "Oh, sir, what shall we do now?" the young man cried to Elisha. That kind of freak you out a little bit, huh? Surrounded by enemy troops. Not good. It was all fun when the enemy was being baffled because God was revealing to the boss where not to have the king go. Not so good when you're surrounded, right? And Elisha said, "Don't be afraid, for there are more on our side than on theirs." Servant's going, "I don't see that at all. My eyes tell me you're nuts. Alls I see is we're surrounded. Alls I see is the odds are overwhelming. Alls I see is it's hopeless. Alls I see is we're going to die." That's what I see. Then Elijah prayed, "O Lord, open his eyes and let him see." Now here's the thing. We can have our natural eyes wide open and not see what's going on in the spirit. Elisha could already see what was going on in the spirit. Elisha already knew what was going on in the spirit. God had already revealed to Elisha what it was. His spiritual eyes were already seeing that situation. And so Elijah prayed, and then it says, the Lord opened the young man's eyes, and when he looked up, he saw that the hillside around Elisha was filled with horses and chariots of fire. My God has provided exactly what I need. My God has overcome. I don't have to be dismayed. It's taken care of. And the servant's eyes were open so that he could see in the spirit. His spiritual eyes were open so that he could see the provision of God, the care of God that was taking place. There's times when we're going through things, we need to be able to just say, "God, open my eyes. Let me see what you're doing." And he can move on your behalf. Then Elisha went out and told them, "You've come the wrong way. This isn't the right city." Actually, let me back up. As the Aramean army advanced towards him, Elisha prayed, "O Lord, please make them blind. Open my servant's eyes. The enemy, blind them." Now, Make them blind. So the Lord struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. Now, I've read a number of commentaries on this, and they say it wasn't that they were completely blind per se, but their vision was just very blurred and dimmed. I don't know. Some people, if you've had your eyes dilated, they really have trouble seeing. I've never really experienced that in a big way. I've generally, my vision's still been pretty good, even when my eyes were dilated. Yeah. So, well, it used to be I had really good vision. Now, if I take my glasses off, things start to, fade away. So their vision became blurred and dimmed to the level that, you could see maybe that someone was there, but you couldn't make out who it was. Or you could see that, there was some, a mountain and whatever, but you couldn't really make out any distinguishing features. Does that make sense? And so it says that he told them, "You've come the wrong way. This isn't the right city. Follow me, and I'll take you to the man you're looking for." Now, you could say, well, Elisha was lying. No, he was telling the truth. Follow me, and I'll take you to the man you're looking for, because he was going with them. And he led them to the city of Samaria. And as soon as they had entered Samaria, Elisha prayed, "O Lord, now open their eyes and let them see." So they opened their eyes, and they discovered that they were in the middle of Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he shouted to Elijah, "My father, should I kill them? Should I kill them?" I want to go back to being blind. I don't want to know where I'm at. Waking up in a bad spot. Suddenly, the very person they were looking for was standing right there, and suddenly, it wasn't his life that was in their hands, it was their life that was in his hands. "Should I kill them?" he said. "And of course not," was Elijah's reply. "Do we kill prisoners of war? Give them food and drink and send them home to their master." Practiced mercy. So the king made a great feast for them and sent them home to their master. And after that, all the Arameans' raids stayed away from the land of Israel. God did this miracle. But it was because Elijah prayed, "Open my servant's eyes, let him see his eyes, let him see what you're doing in the spirit." Then he took the enemy and said, "Blind them." And then at the appropriate time, okay, open their eyes that they can see the state they're in. And when he did that, then they had a change of heart. Then they were dealing with judgment. And Elisha shows mercy to them, much like God shows mercy to us. When their vision was restored, they could see what kind of men they were. That's probably old school church. When we talk about when God opens my eyes and I can see the kind of man that I am. Sometimes that's not a very pretty picture. When I see what kind of man that I am, then I have to ask God to restore me. It's our spiritual eyes that's being talked about in this story. So we start with iron that swims, our natural eyes. Something I can't believe my eyes. Then we have the spiritual eyes being opened. I was trying to believe my eyes, but no, I have to believe what God reveals in his spirit. See, we're supposed to be open to both. We're supposed to be open to what God's doing. See, the thing that we need to deal with in these times that we live in is my perception of God's move. If you're not spending time asking God to reveal what he's doing to you, you should be. Particularly in the days that we live in. God, I need an answer. Most of the time the answer is trust me. Okay, God, I'm not seeing this. How can I trust you? Well, let me open your eyes and you can see the mountains filled with horses and with chariots of fire. And when God does a miracle for you that you can see with your own two eyes, you need to remember that because that will build your faith. Paul said to Timothy, think back, remember. Remember the things you've seen God do? Be encouraged by that. We need to encourage our hearts by what we have seen God do, by the miracles that we've seen. So why do I need to do this? Well, I need to be clearly focused on God, because I got news for you. He's in charge of the rest of your life. And he's in charge of the rest of time before time becomes no more. And it might be that your horoscope says something vague enough to confuse you into thinking that it's correct. But if you're looking at your horoscope, that's a horrible situation. You need to be looking right here in the Word of God. Yeah, it's the horoscope. Yeah, I've told it before, but I've never been a believer of reading horoscopes and that sort of thing. But there was a point and I was in high school at the time, and I was just kind of, it was something. It was whatever a newspaper I was reading or whatever. It was right there, and so I would look at it and I would go, oh, that's kind of funny or whatever. And so one day, I read my horoscope, and it said that I should avoid being around equipment. It was a danger to me that day. And I was supposed to, in my woodshop class, make this kind of complex cut and stuff on one of the saws. And I was like, oh, man, I probably better not do that. But I had to get it done for the project, and that's when my time was scheduled. And I was stressing over that big time. And I finally thought, you know what, this is stupid. This is absolutely stupid. One, I'm going to be careful, and two, I'm trusting in God, not in some piece of paper, which all it's done so far is steal my peace. So I went ahead and did what I needed to do. And that's what the last time I've read a horoscope, and that's it, nothing. I have no desire to even read one. There's nothing it's going to say that's going to be good. It's a waste of paper. Yes, that's exactly right. We trust the maker of the stars. When should we start doing this? We should start following God, paying attention to what he's doing, and looking for God's move. When? The sooner the better. Yeah. Well, I've said now several weeks in a row. I thought I'd just go with sooner or the better. How? Open our eyes, Lord. God, open my eyes so I can see. God, open my eyes so I can see what you're doing. Open my eyes so I can see what you want to do in me. God, if there's anything that's not right in me, tell me, show me. Let's get it dealt with, because I don't want to be out of sync with you, God. I've said it a number of times, and I think Pastor said something similar, but it's like being involved in worship. You walk up on the platform, you need to have your heart right with God. If you're supposed to be leading people in worship and you're supposed to be participating in worship, you probably should have your heart right. If you don't, it's probably not going to be very harmonious from a spiritual standpoint. So our commitment, God, let me see with your eyes. Let me have your compassion. And God, remove the blinders of myself so that I can have clarity. That should be our prayer. I asked Mario Murillo, I asked him one time about miracles. Mario, you call people out. The person in the fifth row with the 49ers shirt on or whatever. God says, and he calls out that healing or whatever. I said, how does that work? What are you seeing? How does God tell you that? How does that go? And he said, well, first of all, it starts in prayer before I ever get there. It's not happening in the moment. So I spend time in prayer, and I know that he does. I've traveled with him a number of times. He spends hours in prayer before he ever walks up to start speaking. But he said, what happens is God, first of all, will lay compassion on me for that person. And that compassion is happening in my prayer time. I have this compassion for them, and God will show me the person before we ever get to the service. He'll show me the person, give me the compassion. And he said, when I stand up there, I'm just looking for the people that God's already shown me. And the miracle comes moved by the compassion of God. It's totally by God. And so whatever you have going on today, whether it's believing the miracle that you're seeing with your eyes or whether it's that you need to have your eyes opened, the bottom line is this: no matter what your situation is today, the mountains are filled with horses and chariots of fire because God loves you and God will take care of what you need. You just need to go to him and say, God, open my eyes to what you're doing, and I give it to you. And that's it for this.